The metal restraints bit into Vailara's wrists as she was marched down the sterile corridor of the Earth Alliance battleship. Her green skin, luminescent under the harsh artificial lighting, marked her as unmistakably alien, a Helixian, enemy of humankind for 3 centuries. Her crimson hair, now tangled and dull from days in confinement, hung like a blood-soaked curtain around her slender shoulders. "Keep moving, specimen," growled the guard behind her, prodding her forward with his pulse rifle. Vailara bit back a retort. On her world, she was a respected xenobiologist and diplomat, sent on a mission of secret peace negotiations. Now, through betrayal and ambush, she was reduced to property, a living trophy of war. The corridor ended at a massive door emblazoned with the insignia of Earth Alliance Command. It slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a spacious office dominated by a panoramic viewport showing the endless void of space. Before it stood a tall human male in the crisp black uniform of a commander. "The Helixian prisoner as requested, Commander Hayes," announced the guard, shoving Vailara forward. Commander Jordan Hayes turned, and Vailara found herself staring into eyes the color of Earth's oceans, a blue she'd only seen in stolen transmission footage. His face was angular, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble, and unexpectedly youthful for someone of his rank. "Remove her restraints," Hayes ordered. The guard hesitated. "Sir, regulations state." "I'm aware of regulations, Lieutenant." "Remove them." When the cold metal fell away from her wrists, Vailara resisted the urge to rub the raw green skin. Instead, she stood tall, her amber eyes challenging the commander's blue ones. "Leave us," Hayes said to the guard, who reluctantly complied. Once they were alone, Hayes gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." "I prefer to stand." A faint smile touched his lips. "As you wish." He leaned against his desk, studying her. "Do you know why you're here, Dr. Vailara Tiran?" Surprise flickered across her face at the use of her title and full name. "Yes," she replied coldly. "Because your species delights in violating diplomatic immunity and your archaic accords allow the capture of Helixians as property." "Not exactly," Hayes replied, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "You're here because someone in your delegation sold information to both sides. Our intelligence indicates you were deliberately sacrificed, by your own government." The word struck like physical blows, but Vailara refused to show it. "A convenient lie to justify my imprisonment." Hayes pushed away from the desk and approached a wall console. The screen flickered to life, displaying intercepted communications in Helixian script. As she read, Vailara's heart beat faster with mounting horror. The messages were authentic, bearing encryption codes only her government could produce. "Why show me this?" she whispered. "Because I need your trust," Hayes said, now standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his human body. "Something larger is happening, and I believe both our peoples are being manipulated." Before she could respond, the ship lurched violently. Alarms blared as the deck tilted, sending Vailara stumbling forward. Hayes caught her instinctively, his arms wrapping around her waist. The moment his skin touched the exposed portion of her midriff where her torn uniform had separated, an electric current seemed to pass between them. Vailara gasped, her amber eyes widening with shock at the unexpected surge of pleasure from the contact. Hayes appeared equally startled, but didn't release her as the ship rocked again with explosive force. "We're under attack," he said, his voice husky from the lingering effect of their touch. "And not by your people." The viewport behind them shattered as a projectile breached the hull. Hayes shielded her with his body as decompression alarms screamed. With one arm still around her waist, he dragged them both toward an emergency bulkhead. "The treaty makes you my ward," he shouted over the chaos. "But I'll give you a choice, come with me and stay alive, or take your chances with whoever's boarding this ship." In the flashing red emergency lights, with the human's arms still sending unwanted ripples of sensation through her body, Vailara made her decision. "Lead the way, Commander," she replied, hating her dependence but determined to survive, and escape at the first opportunity. Neither of them could have known that their escape would forge the first link in a chain that might end centuries of hatred between their kinds, or that the inconvenient attraction flaring between them would become the catalyst for revolution. The escape shuttle plummeted through the atmosphere, trailing smoke and debris as warning lights flashed across the control panel. Violara gripped the edges of her seat, her knuckles turning a pale mint as the craft shuddered violently around them. "Brace for impact," Commander Hayes shouted, his hands dancing across the controls with practiced precision. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he fought the failing stabilizers. The shuttle hit the planet's surface with a deafening crash, skidding across rocky terrain before coming to rest at the edge of a dense, alien forest. The sudden silence was broken only by the hiss of ruptured coolant lines and the soft ping of contracting metal. Violara opened her eyes to find Hayes slumped forward against his restraints, a gash across his temple leaking crimson blood. She hesitated only a moment before unbuckling herself and moving to check his pulse. The touch of her fingers against his neck sent that same strange tingle through her, but she forced herself to focus. His pulse was strong, if rapid by human standards. "Commander," she said, shaking him gently. "Hayes. Wake up." His eyelids fluttered open, revealing those unsettling blue eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice rough. "I'm functional," she replied, pulling away. "Which is more than can be said for your shuttle." Hayes unstrapped himself and stumbled to the control panel, pressing buttons that remained dark and unresponsive. "Communications are down. Navigation, life support, everything. Where are we?" Violara moved toward the viewport, gazing out at the alien landscape. The forest was composed of tall, spiral-shaped trees with luminous blue leaves. 2 small moons were visible in the lavender sky. "If we stayed on course, this should be Terrace 9, Hayes said, joining her. "Uninhabited, but the atmosphere is breathable." Alliance surveyed it as a potential colony world, but the indigenous flora proved too aggressive for easy settlement. "Aggressive flora?" Violara raised an eyebrow. "Nothing we can't handle," he said with a confidence she suspected was partly bravado. "But we need shelter before nightfall. Temperature drops about 40 degrees. They salvaged what they could from the shuttle: emergency rations, a water purifier, 2 thermal blankets, and Hayes' standard-issue multi-tool. As the larger of the moons rose higher, they made their way to a rocky overhang that would provide minimal protection. "We should build a fire," Hayes said, gathering strange, twisting branches from the edge of the forest. "The smoke might attract rescuers." "Or whoever attacked your ship," Violara countered, but helped him arrange the wood. When the fire was crackling between them, casting dancing shadows across their faces, Violara finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why did you bring me with you? You could have left me to die when the ship was attacked." Hayes leaned back against the rock wall, studying her across the flames. "The treaty may make you my ward, but I'm not your owner, Violara. I don't believe in the archaic accords. Yet you enforce them." "I follow orders," he said, then grimaced. "Most of the time. But something about your capture felt wrong from the start. And then finding out your own government betrayed you." He shook his head. "There's more happening here than a simple continuation of our species' conflict." Violara wrapped her arms around her knees, her crimson hair falling forward to partially hide her face. "If what you showed me was true, then my entire life has been a lie." "Not your life," Hayes said softly. "Just the context around it." They fell into silence, each lost in thought as the alien night deepened around them. The sounds of the forest, clicks, whistles, and occasional low moans, provided an eerie soundtrack to their isolation. 3 days passed in a routine of survival. They found a freshwater spring nearby, discovered which local fruits were edible, after Violara analyzed their chemical composition using a small scanner from her torn uniform, and constructed a more substantial shelter using branches and the shuttle's emergency tarp. On the fourth morning, Violara returned from gathering water to find Hayes constructing some kind of weapon using wood and metal salvaged from the shuttle. "What is that?" she asked, setting down the water container. "Spear," he replied, binding a sharpened piece of metal to a long, straight branch. "I saw tracks near the spring. Something large. We might need to hunt if the rations run low." Violara watched his hands work, strong and capable. Despite herself, she was beginning to respect his adaptability. Most Earth Alliance officers she'd encountered would have broken down by now, but Hayes approached their situation with pragmatic determination. "Your wound is healing well," she noted, gesturing to the cut on his temple, now scabbed over. "Thanks to your herbal concoction," he said with a small smile. "Xenobiology has its perks." The casual interaction felt dangerously normal, as if they weren't hereditary enemies stranded alone on an alien world. Violara turned away, uncomfortable with the growing ease between them. That night, as they huddled near the fire against the planet's bitter cold, Hayes suddenly began to shiver violently. His face, when Violara touched it, burned with fever. "What's wrong?" she demanded, alarm rising as his eyes rolled back. Something bit me," he managed through chattering teeth. He pulled up his sleeve to reveal an angry red welt on his forearm, swollen and laced with dark lines extending toward his heart. Violara recognized the pattern of systemic toxin spread. Without intervention, he would be dead before morning. She looked around desperately at their meager supplies, knowing none would help against whatever venom now coursed through his veins. There was only one option, one she had sworn never to use with an off-worlder. "I can help you," she said, placing her hands on either side of his face, "but it will create a connection between us. A biological link." "Do it," he whispered, already slipping toward unconsciousness. Violara took a deep breath and focused her energy. Her palms began to glow with a soft green light that pulsed in rhythm with her dual heartbeats. She pressed her forehead to his, her crimson hair falling around them like a curtain, and opened the cellular channels that allowed Helixians to share life force. The connection was immediate and overwhelming. She felt his pain surge through her, his fever becoming her own as she drew the toxin into her system, where her body could neutralize it naturally. But beyond the physical sensations came something far more intimate, flashes of his life, his hopes, his deepest fears. She saw his childhood on a crowded Earth, his drive to prove himself, his growing disillusionment with the Alliance's propaganda about Helixians. And he would be seeing her memories too. The thought sent panic through her, but it was too late to break the connection. She could only hope he wouldn't remember the details when he woke. When the healing was complete, Violara collapsed beside him, exhausted beyond measure. The biological bond hummed between them like a living thing, tethering them in ways neither fully understood. Morning found them lying side by side, Hayes' arm draped protectively across her waist, their bodies curved toward each other like matched puzzle pieces. Violara woke first, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar proximity. She carefully slipped from beneath his arm, but the movement roused him. His eyes found hers, clear now of fever. "You saved my life," he said simply. "Yes." She couldn't bring herself to say more, knowing he must have glimpsed her memories, her truths. That evening, under twin moons bathing the alien landscape in silver light, Jordan took her hand. The familiar electrical sensation sparked between them, heightened now by their biological connection. "Thank you," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Words failed her as he leaned closer, his lips hovering near hers. When they finally met, stars seemed to explode behind her eyelids, a first kiss under alien stars, forbidden and perfect and terrifying in its implications. The whine of approaching engines shattered their morning peace 2 weeks after the crash. Violara and Jordan exchanged a single glance before scrambling to hide their shelter beneath forest debris. Alliance? Violara whispered as they crouched behind dense foliage. Jordan shook his head, studying the descending craft through improvised binoculars. No. Mercenary colors. His jaw tightened. Bounty hunters. How would they know we're here? They wouldn't. Unless. His eyes darkened. Unless someone's tracking you specifically. The truth hit her with brutal clarity. My genetic signature. Helixian DNA is valuable on black markets. 6 heavily armed figures emerged from the landed vessel, scanning equipment already active in their hands. Their leader, a scarred human with cybernetic enhancements, pointed toward the forest, directly where they hid. Run, Jordan whispered, grabbing her hand. They fled deeper into the forest, hearts pounding in unison thanks to their bond. Behind them, pulse weapons discharged, sizzling the vegetation. For 3 days, they stayed just ahead of their pursuers, moving only at night, hiding during daylight. On the 3rd night, trapped against a sheer cliff face with the hunters closing in, Jordan pulled Violara into a narrow crevice barely large enough for them both. They can track your genetic signature, he whispered against her ear. But not if it's mixed with mine. The implication hung between them for one breathless moment before Violara pulled his face to hers. Their kiss was desperate, hungry, inevitable. Bodies pressed together in the confined space, they surrendered to weeks of building desire. Their joining was like nothing either had experienced, the biological bond amplifying every sensation, creating feedback loops of pleasure that transcended physical boundaries. For precious hours, they forgot the danger, the impossibility of their situation, losing themselves in each other. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, reality crashed back. My people would execute me for this, Violara whispered. Intimate contact with humans is our highest crime. Jordan's arms tightened around her. The Alliance would imprison me for fraternizing with the enemy. He pressed his lips to her forehead. I don't care. Neither do I, she realized with wonder. Not anymore. Dawn brought silence, the hunters had lost their trail, the genetic confusion working as Jordan had hoped. But their reprieve would be temporary. We need to find a way off this planet, Jordan said as they cautiously emerged from hiding. And then? Violara took his hand, her decision made. And then we find the truth about why our people are really at war. The abandoned structure rose from the jungle like an ancient monument, its architecture neither human nor Helixian. Jordan forced open the sealed entrance, revealing dusty corridors lined with technology beyond either of their experiences. What is this place? Violara wondered aloud, her scientist's curiosity overwhelming caution. Some kind of research station, Jordan replied, examining markings on the walls. Look, these symbols combine elements of early human writing and ancient Helixian script. They progressed deeper, finding laboratories containing preserved specimens and data terminals. When Violara managed to activate one, holographic displays illuminated the chamber, revealing genetic sequences that made her gasp. Jordan, these are comparative DNA analyses of humans and Helixians. Her hands trembled as she manipulated the displays. They're showing a common ancestry, we evolved from the same source species. Jordan stared at the evidence with dawning comprehension. That's impossible. Our species originated on different planets, different star systems. Not according to this data. Violara accessed more files. It suggests both our species were seeded by someone else, a third party that's been manipulating our development, keeping us in conflict. Further exploration revealed the devastating truth. A powerful intergalactic consortium had engineered the human-Helixian war to maintain control of valuable resources in both systems. Peace would threaten their power. We need to get this information to both governments, Jordan said urgently. Before they could form a plan, the facility's perimeter alarms blared. On security monitors, they watched Earth Alliance forces surrounding the structure. "They've found us," Jordan said grimly. "Violara, listen to me, I need to go out there alone." "No. They'll arrest you for desertion. Better me than both of us." He cupped her face. "I can convince some of my former crew to help. Trust me." Their goodbye kiss was agonizing, the bond between them stretching painfully as Jordan was taken away in restraints. Violara, hiding in the facility's lower levels, wept for the first time since childhood. Hours later, heavy footsteps approached her hiding place. She prepared to fight, but instead found herself surrounded by Alliance soldiers, their weapons trained on her. "Dr. Violara Tiran," said their leader formally, "you are hereby detained under the Archaic Accords." Her last thought before they stunned her was of Jordan's face and the promise in his eyes. Violara paced her cell aboard the Alliance prison ship, feeling Jordan's presence growing stronger through their bond. 36 days of imprisonment had tested her resilience, but certainty kept her strong. He was coming. When alarms blared throughout the ship, she smiled. Battle stations were announced as unidentified vessels appeared on scanners. Not an attack, a rescue. Her cell door slid open to reveal Jordan, flanked by 2 Alliance officers and, incredibly, a Helixian commander. "Time to go," Jordan said, extending his hand. Aboard a neutral diplomatic vessel, Jordan explained how he'd used the facility's data to convince key members of both governments to listen. Though many rejected the evidence as fabrication, enough believed to arrange this unprecedented joint operation. "Our worlds are assembling a council," said the Helixian commander. "The consortium's agents within our governments have been identified." "What happens now?" Violara asked, her hand firmly in Jordan's. "Now we present our findings together," Jordan replied. "As the first Helixian human pair in 3 centuries, we embody the possibility of peace." The council convened on a neutral space station. Though hostility permeated the chamber, silence fell as Jordan and Violara presented the genetic evidence, historical manipulations, and finally, most powerfully, demonstrated their biological bond. The Archaic Accords were designed by consortium agents to prevent exactly this, Jordan concluded. Because they feared what we might become together. The vote was narrow, but decisive. The Accords were dissolved, officially freeing Violara from her bound status. 6 months of negotiations followed, building the framework for cooperation rather than conflict. On the observation deck of the peace station, Violara watched the stars with Jordan's arms around her waist. "Ambassador Tiran," he murmured against her crimson hair. "It suits you." "As does Ambassador Hayes," she replied, turning in his embrace. "Though I prefer simply being yours." "And I yours," he said, kissing her beneath countless stars as their newly freed peoples took their first steps toward shared destiny. Their bodies, green skin against tan, different yet fundamentally the same, had become the bridge between worlds, proof that what bound them together was stronger than what had kept them apart.